transition model. And basically, what this is a graph that seeks to explain how different social and economic factors um, relate to changes in population within a country. So what you'll see is that on the y-axis of this graph, it measures the birth, death rates, and total population of the country. And on the x-axis, it's time. Now you'll see that the x-axis is divided into 5 different blocks here. And these are the different stages of the country's development, starting out with pre-industrialization and ending with post-industrialization. And as the country transitions into each phase, we see different characteristics in the country's population growth. And what this model does is relates those changes in the country's population growth to different economic and social changes that are happening at that time in society. So with that being said, let's start labeling the graph so you can get a better grasp of what it is. So we'll start out with stage 1. And in stage 1, this is an agrarian society. And in this agrarian society, birth rate, which I'll do in this blue color, is high. And it's high because when most families are working on farms, you have to have a lot of people to work in the fields, and because of that, families are going to tend to be larger. The birth rate's also going to be high because the child mortality rate at this phase is high. And when the child mortality rate is high, what that means is a mother might have 12 births in her lifetime, but only 6 or 7 of them might live past the age of 5. And because of that, and because there's not a food surplus at this point in society, meaning that people aren't as healthy, the death rate is also high. So let me go ahead and label these so you can reference these later. So the birth rate's in blue. The death rate's in red. And I'll do the total population in yellow. So if both the birth and the death rates are high, and the population was low to begin with, that means the population growth is actually going to be stagnant. So the population's low, and it's sort of gradually increasing, but it's not increasing at any significant rate. Now as we transition into stage 2, this is a pre-industrial society. And I forgot to say, since the growth is so low in stage 1 is categorized as a low growth stage. Like I said, stage 2 is a pre-industrial society. So what we start to see is the country starting to advance economically. So more people are moving into cities because that's where more of the jobs are at this point. And also in this point, we're producing enough food to sustainably feed the entire population. And when we have a food surplus, and people are able to eat as much as they need and eat healthier, people tend to live longer, and the child mortality rate tends to go down. Another characteristic of stage 2 is that there's going to be an introduction of more modern medical techniques, and the combination of the food surplus and the modern medical techniques are going to cause the death rate to really fall in stage 2. Now, even though the country is advancing a lot economically in stage 2, socially, there aren't very many changes. And because there aren't very many changes socially, and there's still traditional values within the society, the birth rate still remains high. It starts to steadily decrease, but it's still, going to be at a, relatively high level, as you can see by the axes right here. Now, what we can start to see is this gap start to form in between the birth rates and the death rates. And when the birth rate's higher than the death rate, that's going to cause a population increase. And because of this significant population increase, stage 2 is categorized as a high growth phase. It's the wrong color. Now in stage 3, industrialization is in full swing. So what's happening in stage 3 is there are actually more people living in cities now than are working on the farms. So we're continuing to advance economically. But also in stage 3, we're starting to see major social advancements take place in society, specifically in the area of women's rights. So what we're starting to see is that women are no longer confined to the household. Women are going out and working and having jobs of their own. And what social scientists and economists have found is that when women are out of the house and working and holding their own, the birth rate tends to decline. So in stage 3, because of this social progress, the birth rate is going to start to really fall. Now, the death rate is also going to fall in this stage, but it's not going to be falling at quite the level as it was in stage 2, because the new medical advancements aren't going to have as much as the impact as the food surplus did. And we still have this gap in stage 3, but it's closing, so it's not quite as big as it was in stage 2. And because it's not quite as big, the population growth is going to start to level out. And because of that, we call stage 3 moderate growth. Now, stage 4 is post-industrialization. And this is when we start to see the economy change from more of a goods-based economy into more of a service-based economy. And in the service-based economy, people are going to continue to have less children than they did in stage 3 in the industrial economy. We're going to have an entire economy devoted just to medicine and discovering new medical techniques. So death rates are going to decline as well in this phase. And what we see in stage 4 is that the gap between the birth and the death rate really starts to close. So where it was pretty wide in stage 2 and 3, it's very narrow in stage 4. And because of that, the population growth levels off to a gradual increase. And because of that, we're once again in a low growth phase. Chose the wrong color again. Low growth. Now, there's another stage called stage 5. And this is sort of a negative growth stage. And this is when socially society has gotten to a point where families just aren't having as much children or having a sufficient amount of children to meet the replacement rate of the country or to replace the population they currently have. And in this phase, what happens is the birth rate falls, but the death rate, remains relatively similar to as it was in stage 4. And in this phase, the death rate actually exceeds the birth rate. And at this point, the total population begins to fall. Now, stage 5 is a theoretical phase. We don't currently have any countries in this phase. However, geographers expect that within the next few decades, some European countries such as Germany and Switzerland will enter this phase because people are having less and less children, and eventually they won't be having enough to replace the current population that's already there. Now, also, we don't currently have any countries in stage 1 in agrarian society because industrialization has pretty much penetrated, everywhere on the earth right now. And most places do have some form of medical care to the point where birth rates are exceeding death rates. Now, we do have plenty of countries in stage 2, and most of these countries are going to be located in Africa, countries like Kenya, Zambia, where industrialization has entered the country. More people are moving to cities. However, the traditional values of that society is still there, and people are having more children, and that's where we're seeing the highest rates of population growth right now. Now, stage 3 are going to be most of your Asian countries and Latin American countries, where more people are working in cities than are farming at this point. However, the birth rates are still higher than the death rates, but birth rates are coming down, and we are starting to see population stagnation. So whereas while China was a country that was having the highest levels of population growth in the latter part of the 20th century, now we're starting to see a population level off, especially as they're entering the one-child policy in an antinatalist society. Now, stage 4 are going to be countries like the United States, pretty much everywhere in Europe, and some Asian countries such as Japan, where we're in a primarily service-based economy. The birth rate's continuing to fall, the death rate's continuing to fall. However, there's a gap between the birth and death rate is closing. And there are currently no countries in stage 5, as I said before, because every population is still continuing to grow at some level.